This meeting will now come to order. I will read the EPSB mission statement. The Education Professional Standards Board, in full collaboration and cooperation with its education partners, promotes high levels of student achievement by establishing and enforcing rigorous professional standards for preparation, certification, and responsible and ethical behavior of all professional educators in Kentucky. Serving as the board secretary is Ms. Sharon Chesser. Ms. Chesser, please call the roll.
Amanda Ellis, Scotty Collard,
Here.
Elijah Edwards, Kathy Gunn,
Here.
Priscilla Keller,
Here.
Jacqueline Mayfield, Lori McKinn,
Present.
Justin Mitchell,
Here.
Corinne Murphy, Meredith Pittman,
Here.
Lisa Brzezinski,
Present.
Vice Chair Fryer,
Present.
Chair Snell,
Here.
have quorum.
Thank you. This afternoon, we have one consent item, the May 12th EPSB meeting minutes. A second to look at those. Do we have a motion to approve the May 12th EPSB meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Pittman. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Lori. The motion before the board is to approve the May 12th EPSB meeting minutes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes. At this time, I believe we're ready to go in closed session pursuant to KRS 61810(1)C and J to conduct a character and fitness review and review potential actions relating to complaints and reports. The board will also be reviewing pending litigation. I need a motion to go into closed session.
I'll make a motion to enter closed session.
Thank you, Captain Rosinski. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Priscilla. The motion before the board is a motion to go into closed session. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. We are now ready to move into closed session. At this time, I will need a motion to go into open session.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Do I have a second?
Make it second.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. The motion before the board is a motion to go back into open session. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. We are now back in open session. At this time, we will vote on those items discussed during closed session. Character and fitness, number 1, approve. Number 2 and 3, conditional approval. Number 4, deny. Number 5 through 9, approve. Number 10, deny. Number 11 and 12, approve. On the agreed orders, number 1 through 9, accept. On the recommended orders, number 1 and 2, we accept the findings of fact, the conclusions of law, and the recommended order. On the educator cases, number 1, further investigation. Number 2, approve the agreed order. Number 3, further investigation. Number 4, approve the agreed order. Number 5 through 8, further investigation. Number 9, approve the agreed order. Number 10, 11, and 12, further investigation. Number 13, approve the agreed order. Number 14, dismiss with prejudice. Number 15, approve the agreed order. 16, 17, and 18, further investigation. Number 19, dismiss with prejudice. Number 20, dismiss without prejudice. Number 21 and 22, initiate a hearing. 23, 24, and 25, further investigation. 26, 27, and 28, dismiss with prejudice. And 29 and 30, initiate a hearing.
CJ Fryer, recuse on agreed order number 1. Yes to all other.
Lisa Brzezinski, yes to all.
Scotty Collier, recuse myself on educator case number 10. Yes on all others.
Priscilla Keller, yes to all.
Lori McKinn, recuse on educator cases 11 and 19, and yes to all the others.
Amanda Ellis, yes to all. Corinne Murphy, yes to all.
Meredith Pittman, yes to all.
Kathy Gunn, yes to all.
Justin Mitchell, yes to all.
Amber Snell, yes to all. We will now take a short recess and we'll reconvene in the state boardroom to join the Kentucky Board of Education for the final item of the day. All right, thank you, Chair Robinson and Vice Chair Young and KBE members. The EPSB is excited to join you today and hear more about the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness and how it serves both boards.
Thank you so much. It's very exciting to have you all around the same very large table. So we do want to take a moment to thank the team here that made this possible. It actually took some logistics to figure out where all these chairs could be located. So kudos to them for making it happen. I think it's really important that you all spend some time together hearing about your goals for the educator workforce and coming up with a plan where you can be mutually supportive of each other moving forward. I think great things lay ahead for both boards. So to begin, I wanted to provide an overview on the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness. It is the newest office at the department. So just some background before we sort of talk about the specifics. On August 1st, 2018, through an executive order, Governor Matt Bevin at the time transferred the administrative functions of the Education Professional Standards Board to the Department of Education. Under his executive order, the authority of the EPSB Executive Director was transferred to the Commissioner of Education. And so what does it mean to have the administrative functions of the Professional Standards Board fall under KDE? That is what we're going to talk about today, and hopefully at the conclusion of our presentation, you'll have a better understanding about how our office supports both boards in fulfilling your missions. If we could go to the next slide. This is a graphic that I've shared with you previously, and just want to remind you of sort of our touch points as an office. So whenever we're thinking about any initiative, we're thinking about how it fits within this full cycle of teacher recruitment and retention, and how we can enhance and support our educator workforce in any initiative that we take upon our work in the office. Next slide, please. So this is our office organizational chart. So when the office was originally created, there were 3 divisions, and that mirrored what the divisions were when EPSB was a separate agency with its own administrative staff. However, after the first year at the department, it was determined that the workflow made more sense divided into 2 divisions, and that is the structure that we have now. So we have the Division of Educator Preparation and Certification under the leadership of Division Director Todd Davis, and we have the Division of Educator Recruitment and Development under the leadership of Dr. Vita Stewart. You'll notice on the side that we do have our Principal Partnership Project, and that is a special group of 3 former principals that provide support to administrators all across the state. They are contractors that we have in our office. They have some very specific responsibilities to fulfill some statutory requirements, but they also have created a variety of supports for principals to help ensure that the leadership in our schools is strong. But overall, you can see that in these 2 divisions, there's very distinct responsibilities. We have the Educator Certification Branch. As you can imagine, they are responsible for all of our educator certification issuance. We have the Educator Preparation Branch. They are responsible for working with our educator preparation programs to ensure compliance with all of the required statutes and regulations around educator program quality, as well as working in partnership with our accrediting bodies to ensure that our institutions have satisfied all accreditation requirements. In the Division of Educator Recruitment and Development, they are the proud home of Go Teach KY, our educator recruitment and retention campaign, as well as some new initiatives. The Kentucky Teacher of the Year program is now facilitated through that division, as well as some other initiatives around educator mentorship. So the structure is sort of clearly designed, but let's go to the next slide and you can see how the responsibilities sort of divide between the 2 boards. So in this Venn diagram, I did teach 2nd grade, so I do love a good Venn diagram. So you can see that the Education Professional Standards Board does have very distinct statutory authority, and they are able to promulgate regulations due to that authority. And so they have, as I mentioned, regulations that oversee educator preparation and accreditation, program review, certification issuance, Cooperating teachers, we know that there are expectations for the amount of hours that our pre-service educators spend in field experience. So all of that monitoring and oversight is a directive given to us by the Professional Standards Board. That new teacher induction over the educator mentorship program, that is something that is a direct support that our office provides to EPSB, as well as the oversight of the entrance and exit assessments. We have Praxis currently, and so the monitoring of that and ensuring that that is clearly communicated to our EPPs and our pre-service educators, that is in support of EPSB, as well as rank change. So EPSB has authority over rank change expectations, and so the processing of rank change also is supported in our office. And I would say those are specific responsibilities that reside with the Professional Standards Board. On the other side of the Venn diagram, we have our Kentucky Board of Education, and we have several regulations that are overseen by the state board that also dictate some of the work our office is responsible for. For example, certified evaluation plans are housed in our office. Todd Davis provides consultation and support to districts as they develop their certified evaluation plans. We know that in 2017, there were some pretty significant changes to the evaluation process, so we do not collect teacher evaluation data as was done previously, but we are responsible for ensuring that every district has an approved plan in place. We also, as I mentioned, have the Principal Partnership Project. As part of supporting administrators, that is a directive from the state board, from the Kentucky Board of Education. And so having those 3 Principal Partnership Project team members is in direct response to that work. Teacher of the Year program, national board certification, so those opportunities for leadership. There is an expectation that the department support superintendent training. That contract is currently held by the Association of School Administrators, KASA. And so that satisfying that expectation, we support that as well. We do have the Teaching and Learning Pathway and Educators Rising in our office. So all CTE pathways are a direct response to an issuance from the state board. And so all of that work falls more squarely into the oversight of the state board. However, I would say the most important work that we have perhaps lies in that overlapping area on the Venn diagram. And at the very top there, we have our recruitment and retention efforts. You have heard me talk at length about our Go Teach initiative, our new website, our campaign to help recruit the next generation of educators and support our current in-service educators so that we can address the educator shortage. That is a priority for both EPSB and KBE. Having the highest quality educators in our classroom is a #1 goal for all of us. We want to ensure that our students have the best and the brightest in front of those classrooms. We also have in our office the support of the local education assignment data, or LEAD reporting. And that is where every district has to assure that they have teachers assigned to courses that have the appropriate credentials to teach those courses. And so that is something that really overlaps with both boards. So they have to have the right certificate, but the course identification and the appropriate qualifications for that course are determined in collaboration with the Office of Teaching and Learning as we think about that course content. And so that really is an overlap between both boards. We also support the Kentucky Educator Placement Service, which we know is the repository of all vacancies in the state for our certified positions. That system, although not perfect, is statutorily mandated, and we are required to keep the vacancies updated. Districts have to put any position that is open. They are expected to pull those positions once they are filled, but there is sometimes a delay, so it isn't always the best reflection of the vacancies. But that is something that is sort of in support of both boards, making sure that we can, again, have qualified educators in the classroom. And lastly, you'll see the Impact Kentucky Working Conditions Survey. That is a survey that we offer biannually to educators that allows them an opportunity to speak to working conditions in their building. We currently have a contract with Panorama Education, and they provide the survey to educators. We typically have a pretty high response rate in the low 80s of individuals who choose to complete the survey. And we support the dissemination of those results as well as professional learning around using those results as an opportunity for improvement of our schools. And that really is something that both boards can see value in. So that isn't everything that our office does, but I think is a good presentation of where there are certain responsibilities that we have in our office that can be specifically tied to one board or the other. But certainly there are overlapping goals and priorities that both boards can say are of great importance. Okay, next slide. Very excited that we have Nora here to provide an overview on the Education Professional Standards Board. I will say that our EPSB members could also probably give a very detailed overview similar to what Nora is going to provide, but we felt it was important that she provide an overview of the educator misconduct review process and some information about EPSB just so that everyone has that same sort of foundational understanding. So Nora, thank you.
Thank you all so much for having us all here together. My name is Nora Softich, and I do assist the Education Professional Standards Board in the processing and prosecution of the educator disciplinary casework. So I was asked to speak with you all today about the process by which we process these cases, as well as some of the statutes and regulations that inform our work. So the first slide, very basic, is just what is the EPSB? And Meredith did a great job of going over all of that. But basically, the EPSB is statutorily mandated to set the standards and requirements for obtaining and maintaining a teaching certificate. And you'll see that I'm citing a lot of statutes. So I am an attorney, so my slides aren't as pretty as Meredith's. I do have a picture on slide number 6. So hopefully that would give you a break from all of the verbiage up here. But you'll see that our statutes are very prescriptive, right? So they tell us exactly what we need to do. And you'll see that in 161.028, it describes the membership of the board. And most members are active educators, right? So the idea is that the EPSB is the mechanism by which educators govern themselves. So it is a peer review process. Okay, next slide. And the disciplinary authority of the EPSB derives from 161.120. And again, the statute's very prescriptive. It says that we can take action against a certificate for any misconduct described in 161.120 or the Professional Code of Ethics, which is promulgated in regulation in 16 KAR 1020. And also the statute tells us very specifically that the EPSB's case process is wholly independent of the district's disciplinary proceedings and any tribunal process, right? So that happens at the district level. The employment decisions are independent from the EPSB's prosecution and decision on cases. Next slide. So again, the statute's very prescriptive, and it tells everyone what the board can do. What types of action can the board take? Well, the statute says revocation, which is a permanent forfeiture of a teaching license. Suspension is a temporary lapse in a license up to 2 years. Refusing to issue or renew, so that would be a denial. So someone's coming into the profession and they show that they have, let's say, a lengthy history of some criminal conduct. The board may decide that they do want to deny that application. Back to that one. Imposing probationary and supervisory conditions upon. This allows the board, in certain cases, let's say there's allegations of substance abuse use. The board can then put in a probationary condition to say, hey, we'd like you to get a substance abuse assessment. We would like you to show that you are complying with ongoing treatment recommendations so we can make sure that you are safe to be in a classroom around children. The board can also issue a written reprimand or an admonishment. This is basically a written warning. Admonishment is defined in the statute as a violation that's not serious in nature. So this is a warning. And the statute also tells us that we can do any combination of those sanctions. So sometimes we may do a suspension with training recommendations, substance abuse assessment, as well as a probation. Next slide. The purpose. So the purpose of the disciplinary work is really written out in our regulation in 16 KAR 1030. And you'll see that there's this balance this balance. So the first part is to ensure that the educator has an understanding of their professional duties and responsibilities. And that's where you have this rehabilitative, restorative piece, that if there are gaps in the educator's knowledge, we want to be able to fill those gaps. And then you're also balancing that against this other need, which is to protect students, parents, school personnel, or school officials. So we're always balancing those two big needs. All right, next slide. And you may ask, well, how do we get cases come to us? We don't just randomly draw from a hat and say, oh, we're going to investigate this district. No, it comes to us from superintendent complaints. So superintendents are mandated to report, again, under our statute, very prescriptive. Right there, that citation, it says the superintendents have to report certain things, right? So if there's a termination, a suspension, a non-renewal for cause, or there's this catch-all that they reasonably believe that the conduct could lead to a violation, that they have to report those to us. So that is the vast majority of our cases come in as superintendent complaints. We also do receive complaints from private citizens, from parents, for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. They may have substantiated child abuse on a certain educator, so they will send that information to us. We also oftentimes get complaints from the Office of Education Accountability, and their mandate is to basically investigate district-wide misconduct, and so sometimes they will send us their reports and their findings. We do not accept anonymous complaints, unlike some other agencies. We don't do that. Next slide. So here's my picture, the flow chart. So this flow chart was derived from our statute, which again is very prescriptive. So it tells us each step that has to be taken when we receive a complaint. And it gives us very specific timelines. So you'll see at the top, we get a complaint come in, has to be certified as a complete complaint. So the superintendent will say, this is everything I have in my possession at this time. I'm certifying it's complete. Send it to us. Within 30 days, we then have to do that initial review, right? Is there sufficient credible evidence for this complaint to proceed? And then it goes to the next step, right? And at that step, it may be that there's not sufficient credible evidence for the case to proceed, and then there's no case, right? The process stops there. But you'll see then it goes through another complaint review. The educator is given the opportunity, of course, to submit a rebuttal to provide their side of the story. They are also able to attend a resolution conference where they get to meet with myself or one of the other EPSB attorneys and talk about the case, share information, and talk about any potential resolution that we may be able to recommend to the board when they see the case. And you'll see there at the end, that's how the case will flow to the board. And then we have those 7 different outcomes. When the board sees the case, they can then vote one of those 7 tracks for the case to proceed. All right. Next slide, please. All right. And so this just kind of highlights those green bubbles, the different tracks that the board can take. From dismissal. Conditional dismissal upon completion of training is an offer to, hey, looks like you may need some classroom management training. Take that within the next 6 months, and if you do, we will bring it back to the board with a recommendation of a dismissal. Admonish, I had already explained. Further investigation is when the board would like more information, because again, we're just receiving the information from the district, the information from the educator if they choose to submit a rebuttal, and then there may be further questions that we would like to investigate. There may be further documentation or witnesses that we would like to talk to. So the board would vote for further investigation. Initiate a hearing is when we bring back a case with a charging document. And that document outlines what we believe to be, from our witness interviews and investigation, a statement of the facts, as well as an outline of the different violations of the Code of Ethics and 161-120. And then accept recommended agreed resolution is those agreements that we're able to come to sometimes with educators and or their attorneys during these resolution conferences. And defer is, let's say there's a pending criminal case, we want some more information, we're going to push that to the next meeting or 6 months down the road to obtain that new information. So next slide. So this talks about what happens when the board votes to initiate a hearing. So oftentimes we will hear that the process takes a long time. So I think it's important to know that once charges are filed, most often the Attorney General's office is then involved in that they provide the hearing officers for our cases, for our administrative cases. And so once it's at the Attorney General's office with a hearing officer, the hearing officer really is the individual that dictates the timelines of the hearing. If an educator decides that they would like to continue the case, the hearing officer will generally continue it as a matter of course. The hearing officers oftentimes will issue discovery orders. So discovery is when each party asks the other for evidence, and that can oftentimes be a very lengthy process. And also hearing officers may take months to issue a recommended order after a hearing. Or to respond to a motion or set a pre-hearing conference. So there is another agency that is involved in the prosecution of these cases. And of course, during this process, this is a full due process hearing, right? So KRS 13B, this is another statute that I haven't talked about, but this one outlines those basic due process protections anytime there's an administrative hearing with certain agencies. So it's not just for the EPSB, right? This could be for other state agencies that also have to do hearings. These are the rules, right, that happen. And of course, there's a seminal due process case, U.S. Supreme Court, Goldberg v. Kelly. If you do any sort of government admin work, you know. And the premise of that case is that during the pendency of a hearing, the benefit that the government has bestowed to you cannot be taken away, right? So when these cases are pending, there's no action that has been taken on the certificate, right? So as it's a pending matter, there's not going to be a revocation on the certificate or a suspension on the certificate, right? Because they have a property interest in that certificate until the full due process hearing has played out. A recommended order comes out, a final order comes out, and then the judgment comes out. Right. And the last slide here is, again, the prescriptive nature of our statute and regs, right? We have 16 KAR 030, and it talks about the 6 factors that the board is required to consider when evaluating the reasonableness of the sanctions in any particular case. And so it's a weighing of all of these factors, right? The seriousness of the violation, whether there was an attempt to conceal, right? Did this individual come forward and express remorse, or did they try to cover up the misconduct? Does this person have a pattern, right? Are there prior violations? Has this person been before the EPSB 2 times before, and maybe they were first given a written warning, or then they were given some training, and now here we are again. Another one is whether training is appropriate to prevent further violations. Is this a lower level thing when we talk about these rehabilitative, restorative approaches? Is this something where the individual needs some training, right? There's some gaps in the knowledge that we can hopefully guide them to fill. Whether the sanction is necessary to deter future violations in those serious cases, and other relevant facts and circumstances. I'm happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Meredith is as well. So thank you so much for having me.
And one thing that I do want to point out that I failed to note on our org chart, you may have observed that Nora's team is not listed on that org chart. That is because they are not in the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness. All of the attorneys at the department are in the Office of Legal Services under Deputy Commissioner Allen's leadership. So that is why, although there are EPSB attorneys that you heard Nora reference, there are members of her team that specifically work on EPSB matters. They are all in the Office of Legal Services, not in OELE. So I wanted to clarify that. All right, now is the question portion of our presentation. So happy to entertain any questions you may have.
So one of the important functions is to make sure the pipeline to the workforce is properly supported by standards that that EPSB is responsible for and exercised largely through accreditation. Are all of the teacher preparation programs properly accredited? This is kind of that higher ed culture orientation to collegiate-based professional studies, if you will. So I want to know where we stand
Mhm.
relative to that standard of quality. And the second half of my question is, how are we ever going to enrich and advance the clinical pipeline, the clinical training preparation of the education workforce without a more substantial collaboration between K-12 and higher education?
So to answer your first question, so in order to be a qualifying educator preparation program that can make a recommendation for certification, that institution, that EPP does have to be accredited. And there's 3 possible accreditation options that are currently approved by EPSB. So they can have CAPE, which was previously the only accreditor, national accreditor that we had. Recently, well, it's not been too recently, it's been in the past several years, AQEP was added as an option. And then there is a third option for a state-only accreditation. But there is a requirement that all EPPs be accredited in order to, at the collegiate level, issue certificates. We do have alternative pathways that can result in a certification, and the accreditation requirements within those programs are different, right? But when we're talking about a collegiate pathway, those programs are accredited. As far as, challenging innovation within the EPP space, that is something that I am sure the standards board members have thought of previously and have discussed. Happy to call on anyone who may want to speak to that, like Dr. Murphy.
Not.
Lou's here too. But I guess I'm a member. Sure, I'm happy to speak to it. So of course we have this regulatory and statutory obligations related
Corinne
to.
Murphy, Dean of the College of Education, Western Kentucky University.
Thank you, Lou. I'm so sorry. Yes, and currently the only representative at this table for EPSB for colleges. But
Amy's.
right, sorry.
Right.
So we do have a minimum number of clinical hours. Within that, there's also certain components of those clinical hours that have to be addressed, types of classrooms related to certification areas, but so too the supervision. So there's a partnership expectation and requirement within those regulations around the district, the school district, and the university, the partnership, and who is identified as a district-based supervisor and who is required as or identified as an educator provider, an EPP supervisor. So those have 2 different sets of expectations in how they are selected, how often they can do it, how many students they can have. And so there's some basic check marks that you can go through and actually look at. But then there's also some non-checkmark based indicators of excellence within the clinical training space. And that has to do with our community or an organizational advisory boards that advise each of the education preparation programs. So each education preparation program does include school districts, community constituents, a variety of other individuals on organizational boards that review and are participating in both the accreditation process, but then the non-accreditation process that helps programs know whether they're engaging in best practice or not. I can speak from Western Kentucky University's perspective, where our faculty are actually in the classrooms with our students who are learning to become teachers. And we do that actually at the principal level as well. We partner with districts on co-teaching models where district faculty and district leaders are also faculty members within our programs. And so there's a mixed method to how we ensure that there's a richness to that clinical that matches what today's teachers need. And I think that's really the true importance of the partnership between universities and school districts, is making sure that our classrooms of today are represented and reflected within that program of study. And so that concept is also interwoven into the accreditation process and the program review process, no matter whether you're the state only or whether you are part of the AQEP or CAPE pipeline for accreditation. I hope that answers your question to a certain extent.
Well,
I
it
gotta
does.
Happy to take you on some tours as well.
Chair, I got a follow-up to that.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay, so, that's been my primary question from the last 4 years, okay? And had this conversation with Dr. Thompson multiple times when he was in charge of ESP, is that through our department here, when we look at, we're responsible for literacy and numeracy support. For example, the 2 legislative practices that came out. There's a huge disconnect from what we are saying over here at KDE with the legislature when we're doing assessment for literacy and numeracy in the early grades versus what teachers are being taught at some universities, not all, but at some, and there's a mismatch, but it's not being corrected. How do we correct that so that we're aligned that what we're saying is best practices is also what is being best practices at the university level for their accreditation?
It's a fair question. May I?
You may.
Okay, I
Thank
didn't
you.
know. Can we go back to a few slides of the organizational structure of KDE? Yes, okay, here.
Oh, no, I
Actually,
think
to the
back one.
people,
Yeah,
the
back
people
more.
one with the names
There we
where I can see,
There you
okay.
go.
So under education preparation branch, where you see Melissa Diebel and her team. So Melissa Diebel runs a fair number of the literacy and numeracy partnership programs with education, with the universities to ensure that what you're exactly talking about is incorporated into our educator prep programs. So those teams think through what are the praxis exams that are reflective of those pedagogical practices and content knowledge that are necessary for literacy and numeracy. And so the programs themselves have to submit syllabi, they have to demonstrate within clinical practices where numeracy and literacy are being taught, how they're being taught, how there's also an entire team that's working on HQIR and making sure that the HQIR that's happening for our schools is also reflected into our educator preparation programs. And so those meetings are happening continually. And I think probably one of the things that might be helpful for KBE is to maybe learn a little bit more about that and what are some of those conversations and how universities are actually involved in that discussion because that's exactly where all of that happens. Melissa would know more about, or maybe.
So we
There we
know
go.
that with Read to Succeed and with numeracy counts, there were in those statutorily mandated expectations, there were some directives to our elementary schools and within our in-service teacher space, but there were also expectations placed on our post-secondary institutions. And so what Dr. Murphy is referencing, there was an expectation within Read to Succeed that there be a praxis assessment that was approved by EPSB that would capture that early literacy knowledge within those grade bands that were named within that particular bill. And so as part of that work, Dr. Diebel pulled together representatives from the different EPPs who were literacy experts to talk about what the recommendation was going to be to the board as to what praxis exam would most appropriately capture that knowledge. But we didn't want to just satisfy that requirement. We also wanted to engage in conversation about what was happening at the programs, within those programs, what are some of the curricular changes that had that were taking place. And there was an expectation as well that we evaluate those programmatic changes. And so as part of that, we have been in a multi-year evaluation process with a vendor to evaluate all of the EPP's implementation of those literacy requirements. And so we have sort of a before snapshot where the syllabi and the courses were evaluated from 23-24, and then we're going to be reviewing the 25-26 curricula to see if that sort of revision to those expectations within early literacy have been captured in all of our programs. Somewhat similar within the numeracy, although not as prescriptive, there was an expectation for some changes at the EPP level, as well as an observation protocol that the board will actually be entertaining at their upcoming meeting, a recommendation from that work group that was specific to numeracy around a tool. As I mentioned, we have a lot of field experience hours. Kentucky has more field experience hours than most states as an expectation for our traditionally certified educators. And so as part of that field experience, there is a requirement that they have an observation that is specific to their early numeracy instruction. And so that small work group is going to make a recommendation to EPSB to approve that observation protocol. And that will be a uniform expectation across all of our EPPs. We know that there's inherent autonomy within our post-secondary spaces that is distinct from how we think about kind of the P12 setting, right? There isn't sort of this expectation that we can sort of impose on all of our schools as we do kind of in some situations. There's a lot more flexibility in the post-secondary space, and we want that to be the case. We want them to have that intellectual freedom. So all of our programs are different, but there are common expectations. Certainly alignment and preparation around the Kentucky academic standards, those field experience hours that I referenced, and then specific to literacy and numeracy, Dr. Poe, there is expectations around what they talk about and what they don't learn about as well. That has come out recently too. There's prohibitions on certain content around some of the instructional techniques that are no longer considered best practices.
So I really do appreciate the conversation so much, and many thanks to our partners that are here at the table. I think I just wanted to make a comment, really not a question, but while we have Dr. Ellis here, Council for Post-Secondary Education, our partners from the Education Professional Standards Board, and the members of Kentucky Board of Education, I just feel like this is a unique opportunity, looking at this kind of mothership of talent right here in the state boardroom, to capture that question that you cast, Dr. Robinson, which is how might we collaborate to ensure that our priorities, resources, time, and talent begin to galvanize around this educator workforce challenge that we are facing in Kentucky. And we're not unique to the U.S. in that situation, but how do we bring back the love and respect for teaching as a profession? How do we find partners in our school districts and other associations, but how might we be very intentional about the way we work together as kind of that triumvirate of folks who we can't parse out what CPE does, to Randy's question. We can't always parse out what EPSB does. We certainly can't, there are Venn diagrams abounding in the way that we go about the work, but I think we lose things in that overlap because we aren't intentional about it. So I think that's a little bit of soapboxing for me, pardon me, but did want to just get the chance to say this is a moment in time that is really quite special.
So I may call on Dr. Ellis to provide some clarity, because I think you brought up a really important point. So there is something unique to the authority that EPSB has around program review and approval that is separate from how CPE typically operates programs. Right. And so the Education Professional Standards Board does have full approval authority over those programs that result in teacher certification. So those educator preparation programs. So that initial program review that is overseen by Dr. Diebel's team, as well as those continued program reviews that occur every 7 years as required in state law. That all happens within our office, comes to the board for approval, and then goes to CPE, and they have sort of.
But then think about that Venn diagram with Educators Rising and dual credit, and where's EPSB in that? Where's CPE in that?
And so,
yeah, I mean,
Dr. Ellis might be able to sort of, we have
complexity,
this exciting opportunity where we have a lot more influence in that space than what maybe typically happens. So.
Yeah, so is it on?
Yes.
Okay. So you're right, Lou. And so what Meredith was talking about is the only two programs that we don't approve initially at CPE is teacher education, if it is a teacher certification. If it's non-teacher certification, it comes directly to us, and nursing. But I feel like in education, especially with dual credit, early post-secondary opportunities, the student organizations, all of that we're very supportive of. And that has played a huge part in my role in the last 5 years of reconnecting K-12 and higher ed in those transition spaces for students to be able to see that they fit, that they belong, that they're worthy, and that there are a lot of pathways. And two areas that I feel like we've probably dug into the most so far has been healthcare and education, which is interesting because we don't approve their programs first, especially with the nursing piece. But I think that the only way we can do that is through collaboration, because the student going through the journey, regardless of the age, doesn't know about all of our acronyms and personally doesn't care, right? So we've got to have common messaging for our citizens to say, yes, you can. Yes, we need you, and this is why. And so I think our messaging and our belief statements around the importance of education and educators, which is why we still have it as a priority even in the continuum, because our members have all said from preschool all the way through workforce, if we don't have a strong teacher workforce, we're not going to have a strong future workforce, right? So we've got to have the right people to equip our future. And so we are very much in alignment and on board and in our lane, to definitely support this, which is why I'm here on behalf of Dr. Thompson. He'll be here tomorrow. And so we are very much engaged with that, and not to be siloed, and to listen to our institutions, talk with them, but not overstep, because we know Dr. Diebel is doing a lot of that work. So it's just staying connected. And I would say we stay just as connected to our private institutions, especially the ed prep programs. They're great partners. So we're all trying to accomplish the same things. So I appreciate your statement. And you're right, Meredith, like there's some definite overlap on things, but I hope that we can see the bigger picture and have some common messaging, regardless of what acronym goes with our agency or our board, but that we have a true vision for Kentucky. Our kids are counting on it, and so we have work to do. And I think that's the privilege of the board of the EPSB. First of all, having the privilege of being able to speak to it, and you have practitioners speaking to the work and the policy. And I think I tell Cassie this all the time. I think I'm the longest standing proxy. I was a proxy for Dr. Thompson. I've been a proxy all the way back to Dr. Holliday. And they laugh at me because they're like, yeah, you're really old on this board. But I can tell you it's only gotten better over time. When I first started, it was not well organized, and it was a struggle to be timely. And in the wait, and our process behind closed doors of what we have to do is so well done. Nora is an excellent leader. The attorneys are excellent. And so really this board takes on the role willingly of some long hours, and we meet because of legislation change. We meet about every 3 weeks, and it's not always how we get, sanctions. It's how do we uplift the education field? How do we maintain the integrity of our profession, my title as teacher? That's really important to us. And how do we sell that to others to say, this is not a backup plan. This is your plan, and the benefits of that. And I think we all have to speak to that in a way where people see differences. And I think they also need to see there are lots of pathways in education. And actually the Commissioner Student Advisory a couple of years ago said, how did you get your job? You're at KDE. How'd you get here? I was like, that's a really good question. And so he said, you only talk to us about being a teacher, which is good, but there are a lot of people in education doing lots of different things. What else does education offer? We don't talk about it. And so I think we sell ourselves short when we have the opportunity to be in front of the future every day. And so anyway, so that's my 2 cents on it. And I could not agree more. Lou, I think it is a time, and I think we have the right leaders in the place to advocate and to speak proudly, honestly, for educators in our system. So
You're here.
May I?
Well, this is your meeting. We are here.
Well, because I'm trying to knit it all together. And I'm wondering if our strategic opportunities may rest with perhaps exploring an advocacy agenda on behalf of the profession. Because let me tell you, right now, there are dozens of students all across the state and the country who do not see teaching as a viable career consideration. Now, have we discouraged our recruits? I celebrate Go Teach. I celebrate Educators Rising as real wonderful initiatives, but they're not going to be the source. They're not going to produce the workforce that we need. So if we were to think about what that would look like to establish education as a real profession in the state of Kentucky, what would we do? And I think I want to admit to you, I'm struggling because something ain't working. And we talk about what we have to do before us and make that work. But I think we got to find the leverage points so that the efforts that we do right in front of us are fueling efforts someplace else that gets us to the finish line. Because what KBE has to do, what EPSB has to do, what CPE has to do, alone is not going to get it done. We talk about vibrant learning experiences, but I was an old English teacher. Where do I learn vibrant teaching skills? In the class I took on classic literature, and I read Chaucer with abandon. I loved it. But when it came time to teach the 11th graders American literature, all my love of the content wasn't going to get it done unless I knew how to do that, how to create a vibrant learning experience out of a Steinbeck short story. So are we looking at where that happens? Who's responsible for making sure it happens? I don't know. I haven't looked at accreditation standards in a long, long time. And I know it can't happen unless the folks who teach the content are also training me to expect vibrant learning experiences. And I can't remember a whole lot of them when I was in college, except driven by my passion for the content. Teaching is more than that. Teaching is helping the students find a way to have passion for the content and finding a way to connect with them. And I know, we struggle with pedagogy, and I'm going to stop spouting off, but are we looking for an advocacy agenda so that we can have a profession that portrays all that professional work of teaching is? Is that the way to look at this? Because I guess I'm getting a little impatient. I want to see us find a way to work together to actually, make all the independent parts have more power. On behalf of teachers in the state of Kentucky, we're still coming off an era where the agenda was to vilify teachers. And then we had the pandemic, and folks had to kind of tap that down because all of us were trying to figure it out. So the volume on that went down, but it could come up again in a heartbeat. And I don't think we have a whole lot of time to figure it out, so let's hurry up and find the leverage points for a collaboration that really does help us open the pipeline to the education workforce based on a profession, the work that you guys do, all that means, and tell us what to do to help. What's our role in that? We got to find the path.
So I would view today's meeting as phase one of a multi-phase plan. And so we did have an opportunity for our chairs and vice chairs to come together. And I know that was referenced in each of your meetings previously, that meeting occurred. And that was sort of what led to this overview today. But what we would like to propose is another opportunity for both boards to come together, but in a more informal work session where you can come together, talk about your goals and priorities, be in smaller groups, and really dig in. As Dr. Robinson mentioned, there's a lot to discuss. And so that is something we hope to put into place in the near future. I believe we're going to try to have our chairs and vice chairs come together again to sort of think through the proposed agenda for that meeting. But that is something that is a priority for us should both boards be interested in moving in that direction.
Is that where we will get to ask specific technical questions and so forth then? Or when do we do that? It's been 3 years since legislative change has come in the legislature to us as a KDE, for me sitting on this board. So how many more years of legislation are we going to get shoved down our throat because we're not making changes? That's our major concern. We had literacy started. numeracy. And then we had to push queuing out the door because of the legislature. And, we're looking at a K-3 system and accountability, a 310 system and accountability, and we're not getting there. I just don't want to be another 2 years sitting at this table. That's all I got to say.
So how can we get started and how soon? I think there's a sense of urgency because I'm going to tell you, we get any more legislating practice, we are seeing another erosion in the foundation of what a profession is. Now, I'm not saying, other professions are experiencing the same thing, so we're not all by ourselves. But I do think as we get ready to go into this next session, we have a
Yeah, but it's also more than just recruitment of teachers. I mean, that is a critical issue, don't get me wrong. I mean, we've been faced with that for a long time. But the other issue is we've got legislation out there about other practices that we do that are shifting, that's asked whether that's a KBE issue or an ESP from our legislators. And we got to get that worked out too. So those are points. I know you guys may have had your meeting, and I guess I thought we might be discussing those things today with their joint thing. But those are things that would be on my agenda to make sure we include.
If we could go to the next slide, that might be helpful. So I do want to just reiterate that there are distinct responsibilities for each board. And so at the bottom of the slide, and I believe that you have a copy of the slide deck, I did hyperlink those references at the bottom. So the Title 16 regulations very clearly lays out the responsibilities that reside with the Education Professional Standards Board. And so that educator preparation, so the actual review of educator programs, the accreditation process that we support, that squarely lies with the Professional Standards Board, same as those items I spoke about with the Board of Education. I think what Dr. Robinson is sort of speaking to is in that overlap, where can we advocate for some of these more holistic changes that could have a more substantial impact on the profession. Now, whenever there is a question as to where the authority resides, Todd G. Allen is very good at determining who has the right authority. So that we can always address that when that comes up, because if it falls under, on either side of that diagram, then we can give a very clear answer. I think the challenge, as was sort of alluded to, there's a lot of overlap in sort of the work priorities and the focus areas for each of these different organizations. And so that's where it gets, everyone has a stake in the game. So everyone wants to be in on the conversation. So, but as far as, if something is directed by the General Assembly to us, it will likely be tied to the authority that resides within one of those agencies.
Correct, but I guess, part of this discussion led to the, whatever we call the revenue that we're looking at tomorrow. And there are initiatives that we spend millions of dollars on, but then they're not, on post-secondary, they're not doing the things. So the key critical element is advocacy, coming together, and how do we advocate for the resources to make these things happen when we're not necessarily aligned together to the same point.
Okay.
And to me, we're voting on issues tomorrow, or
Additional budget requests.
the ARP process and
ABR.
so forth, ABRs.
So
And that's an issue that when I'm voting on something and I'm saying resources for numeracy and literacy, but if that's not changing at the post-secondary level, why am I advocating for that?
Correct.
Because we're spending millions of dollars over here in the department on training, but hasn't been carried out. I mean, that's those larger questions than recruitment.
So the additional budget requests that we brought forward were on, that I brought to you a few months ago, were on behalf of our office. And so everything that fell under that request structure would be programmatic support or sort of extensions of existing work that is overseen by the Kentucky Department of Education and the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness, no different than any other office that is under Dr. Fletcher's leadership. I think the challenge that you're describing is that we don't have as much, so we have authority to, as I said, review the accreditation expectations and support that process, program review. But again, those are sort of baseline foundational expectations that are kind of universally applied to all of our programs, but there's still going to be unique elements, right? And so if you're talking about sort of not capturing the literacy instruction at every institution, it could be, we have our minimum expectations and our, here's what you have to have, but that doesn't mean that there may not be some distinct experiences that maybe are best practices or not that are occurring, right? And so we can't really regulate within like every institution is going to have the exact same program. So I don't know if that's what you're kind of talking about, like it's not being done. If you could give me a little bit more information, I could maybe speak to.
Well, I mean,
some of
just
your
like, for
concerns.
example, queuing. For 2-3 years, we've been battling with the science of reading with letters.
Right.
But yet, this post-secondaries have not implemented that across the board. And then last year, we had this department, the Kentucky Department of Education advocating that queuing should not be utilized. So that's fine. But why are our universities still teaching a queuing mechanism?
So 3 queuing is an excellent example, Dr. Poe, of where we were able to come in and say, as part of the overall expectations in Read to Succeed, there were very explicit instructional best practices that were named. And we had to ensure that the curricula at all of our EPPs were updated to align with those expectations.
Which
to
included a
prepare.
prohibition on queuing.
Correct. Okay. Actually, I don't know if that, I'm not sure that there was the full, Holly could probably, it wasn't really, it was almost like indirectly, like if you were doing the things that you needed to do, you would not be doing 3 queuing. There was some conversation this last session to prohibit it explicitly, but I don't believe that passed. But you couldn't have 3 queuing in your curriculum and still satisfy the requirements.
Okay.
Yep.
Each university has to demonstrate that they are using direct instructional methods when it comes to reading.
Literacy.
And whether you want to, we have in the Commonwealth at the K-12 level recognized letters as the named program that uses that same direct instruction to teach everything from phonemic awareness all the way through comprehension. Several universities, including WKU, have wholeheartedly embraced that and implemented that within their curriculum. Other universities have said that is recognized as direct instruction. There are several mechanisms in which we can use, but that is all part of Dr. Diebel's and that review process work. So that is actively happening.
Yeah.
I can tell you that the universities themselves are as frustrated by the legislative moments as many members of this board likely are. But they have wholeheartedly said, we have to keep teaching, we have to keep prepping students to be teachers in our schools, and our schools have the following expectations. Therefore, our programs must make sure that our students, our graduates, are prepared to engage in that environment. And so, does that solve the last 10 years, 20 years of 3 queuing throughout the system? No. But are those processes in place that are holding us to those expectations?
Changing it.
Yes.
So I
Okay,
think
let
an
me
important way.
ask, I
You
just
can,
want to
absolutely, yes.
illustrate, let's take that another step. We've had this legislative intervention on literacy and numeracy. It's got us doing things differently at every level, including, I would dare say, the pedagogy and the content of educator preparation. What do we have? Let me go to the bottom line. I would love to see our regional university systems have a research agenda on numeracy and literacy that requires us to be collecting an organized portfolio of data across the state, recognizing our different conditions, our different kids, our different challenges to practice, so that we have the documentation to go to the legislature 4 years hence and say, this is what you need to fund, either more of this or more of that, because it comes from our voice, our authority. That's representing a profession based on knowledge, of the impact of our work. And that's what I want the profession in Kentucky to be all about. So, I mean, we're doing what we're doing to keep up with the challenges, whether it comes from the General Assembly or from Washington or from some local initiative. But I want to know what we're doing to guide ourselves to get stronger. And, you know, an advocacy agenda and a research agenda, I'd go to, I mean, it sounds like that's what we need. Otherwise, I feel like we're going to become pawns in some political agenda that keeps us always on defense, so we don't have any energy for offense.
Well, and as a follow-up question, I mean, that's on our agenda tomorrow, which is the shifting of the national literacy to U of L that was at UK and helping the other things. But I got a lot of questions on that tomorrow too. I'm sorry, but I do. I read the agenda, you know, and so forth that we, you know, there's questions from the national what's it called? The National Council or something.
Teacher quality.
Teacher quality.
NCTQ.
Okay. And then tomorrow we're going to be discussing literacy and the center that KDE, I guess, was responsible for hiring the people for the center. And there's some questions on there when you go to their center on some of the people that have been hired from KDE on this same topic that we're going to discuss tomorrow. So I agree with everything you just said. That's the key why it's so critical, because I testified over 15 years ago on the science of reading, and we did 10 to 13 years of unsuccess with the literacy center before. And we're going to have that topic tomorrow. And that's the problem. We keep, because of time or whatever, we keep pushing that out. But literacy and numeracy is our number one thing that we got to get right here. And we're not getting the right people.
So I do want to just sort of, and Dr. Ellis, I apologize. I want to
That's my
sort
last
of
question.
do wrap up this one point, and the Venn diagram will surprisingly be helpful here again. So I think if you look at, ignore the words that are in there, pretend it's blank, but if we have institution A in the blue and institution B in the green, the part that we are overseeing of their program review would be the overlapping section in the middle, right? And so what needs to be in the middle there when we're talking about literacy specifically are those expectations that are required, either because of alignment to the Kentucky academic standards, the expectations around their accreditation, the statutory requirements that were built out in Read to Succeed, for example, a variety of different things. So that is where we're looking at, but there can still be those unique elements. And so I think that is important to note that we're not going to have kind of cookie cutter programs that are all the same. So different programs may have, different experiences for their teachers, and that's okay. And so you may hear, well, we did this at our institution, and that doesn't mean that it's inherently not a good program. So there are going to be those, so that's important to sort of distinguish. But I think the other part that I want to make sure, just on behalf of our EPPs, the changes to their literacy instruction efforts was not in direct response to being mandated to do so. That was already happening in our programs. So they were being responsive to best practices, just like all good professors are. So they were already making those changes, and that is captured in our evaluation that we had. We have our first round that was completed by that third-party evaluator, which is required that we have that evaluation. There are some institutions that, without the enforcement of any statutory mandate, have already started to make those changes. Holly is a professor at one of our institutions and can speak specifically to the literacy work that's happening at her college. But I think it is important that we are proactive and that we are not always in this reactive posture. But I think it is important to acknowledge that this push towards creating a school environment that is better suited to this next generation of students is top of mind for all parties. I believe in talking with our post-secondary partners, they are very aware that there needs to be a shift in the preparation of teachers because there are going to be demands placed upon them that are different than they were 20 years ago. So I do want to say that it isn't that they're always compelled to make these changes. It is because they are being professionally responsive. So I don't know, Holly, if there's anything else.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I just know in my own situation, like we have made lots of changes, I mean, we're being very responsive to what teachers are doing in the classroom. We meet routinely with the superintendents in our area, getting feedback about our teachers being prepared and those kinds of things. So,
Yeah, but you're rated very highly. We have several universities here that are failing on that list. So that's where I see it as incumbent upon whoever to make those that's not successful. I mean, you're all rated and you're rated very high, but there's other schools
That's
that's rated very low.
And it depends on the metrics that we're using to rate them. So that's another part that I think is a complicating factor. But I think my reason to talk about the distinction between sort of requirements and that flexibility, it's just important to realize that in talking anecdotally to graduates, they may say, well, we did this, and that doesn't mean that that wasn't allowed to happen, right? So there's this sort of, there's going to be sort of unique experiences for our teachers, but the point is that there's a common thread of quality, and that is what our job is to ensure that happens.
I just had a super quick note as one of the resident math teachers up at this table. I got to give a little love to the numeracy side of things because we talked a lot about literacy here. I know so many of our math education professors across the state, the Kentucky Center of Mathematics, PIMSR, Advanced Kentucky, all incredible organizations doing really transformative, great things. So I know both incoming teachers, current teachers who've been teaching old school math ways for 20, 25 years are really getting great access from really amazing partners we have throughout the state. So I just wanted to give a lovely shout out to them.
And they are active participants in our numeracy work group.
Yes.
So we have representation there, and absolutely. And I think that the coordination of all of these efforts is to the benefit of everyone. I'm not discounting that, but I just think that it is important to clarify that we don't have the authority to dictate and prescribe every single element that happens. And so that's just a little important clarification.
My name is Lisa Rudzinski. I'm an assistant principal with Fayette County, and I represent school administrators on this board, and I also represented teachers before that. And where I think, I love this discussion, but I also think that we have to remember that once those students graduate from those programs, their learning does not end. And then that learning shifts to us as the practitioners to make sure that we are pairing them with mentors who are doing best practices, that we are educating our building leaders on those emerging instructional designs. And as a board, lots of our discussions, because of the representation that we have from so many areas, is we talk about that. We talk about EPPs, but we equally talk about what's happening when they are actually in-service teachers, especially when some type of violation comes before us. We look at the ethical decision-making that they made. We talk a lot about KTIP and the mentorship program and the fact that we are trying to open up education to more people pursuing it as a career. And as a result, that pipeline gets really big and we have to meet people where they are. And putting people in our classrooms while we are creating the pipeline for our students who are going to go on to post-secondary education is equally important to us. And I think that often gets missed. When we talk about what we're doing at the EPPs, we have to remember that there are partners out here in buildings who are equally ready to and willing to make sure that we are doing what we need to do for those teachers, to make sure we don't pair them with a 20-year veteran who is still doing the old practices, to make sure that we are educating those old veterans with 20 years of experience to what's new as well. And I think that piece sometimes is missing when we have mandates and when we fund things. It happens at the post-secondary level, but then when we are expected to enact that out there in the field, we don't have the resources that we need to do that effectively as well. Or we haven't educated our building leaders effectively enough to be able to support that work down into the classrooms.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Lisa, that if you think about our population, and Sharon, I'm thinking about this rally around teachers, is that our largest teacher population is working. They're working, right? And so the EPPs definitely have responsibility, and they have a couple thousand. We have thousands in the classroom. And so, Lisa, to your point, I am very much, we talk a lot about mentoring. We miss that. We miss not all the paperwork of the KTIP and all the things that people didn't love, but the true triage of adults who poured into those new teachers and new administrators. I was one of the last KPIPs, and people poured into me. And so that's why I'm still in education. I didn't leave it because people invested, just like you all have invested. I've invested. And so I think we have to think about retention, because if you have a recruitment problem, you have a retention problem. And so that gets back to me when it sticks out to that Impact Kentucky Working Conditions Survey. Is it perfect? No. Is it a heck of a thermometer? We need to listen. We need to listen to what the teachers are saying. And most of the time, professional learning is not high on the list, or time, or their voice. And so I think that we cannot just put all of our eggs in one basket on who may want to come into the profession, but how do we retain those who are in the profession, who are wearing out? Maybe we haven't invested in them, or maybe we haven't really given them an opportunity to learn. And I would say the same for administrators. Just because you walk in as an administrator does not mean you know it all. I think it's the most humbling position you could work, and you learn constantly. And so, Lisa, you took exactly the words, because it's an all and instead of just recruitment in. And we know that this generation's not staying. They're not going to stay for 30 years. They're going to stay for 3 to 5. And so how do we really look at it differently, even with the folks we have in the buildings? How do we get them to want to stay? How do we improve our environments and our cultures to hear and see people and make it really about that learning? Because the other thing, Randy, I think that sticks out to me is the math and the literacy are absolutely essential, and people are working at it, but we have a whole lot of external things going on too that are causing a lot of distraction. And I think that's where we have to reinvest in our leaders and reinvest in those who are in the classroom to really equip them to meet the needs that are there while partnering with EPPs, because we can't have people pipelining in without basic knowledge to at least start. But it's our responsibility to carry them through and build them and grow them. And I think we've been in triage for a really long time, and we've forgotten what it means to invest in our people and in their capacity. So,
And Chair
I'm
Robinson, I
sorry,
feel like
Sharon.
you're going to be wrapping us up pretty quickly. We're going to get the gong, but
We really
yesterday-
lost control.
Right. Yesterday, Commissioner Fletcher and others presented at the Inter and Joint Committee on Education, and Chair West was really clear in casting an agenda for us to be considering around principal professional learning. So there was a whole section on the agenda yesterday devoted to that. And so again, one of those things, if we're taking stock of the landscape of the work that we could do together with some, strategic priority work and intentionality, I think we need to be sure we include educational leaders on that list as well.
We're here because there was a sense of we need to come together and find a way to work, really find the leverage points and get it rolling. So I promise, I don't know exactly how that's going to operationalize.
We're doing it.
But we got the commissioner and dedicated to this, and I'm going to ask him to, just kind of help us come to a close for this session, because we are way past dinner time. And I know what that means. But with the fervent commitment to bringing us back together for perhaps a more, I'm not going to say more productive, I'm going to say for further work together.
And one of the things that Amanda and Lou both I wanted to kind of emphasize is the role of an administrator as an instructional leader, to me, is the most important role. So how do we handle that with our principals, with our assistant principals and things of that nature? So I think that's very important. But two, that's the need for the work sessions that we're looking at moving forward. There's been so many thoughts around this table that over the past 10 years, I thought, well, that's a good idea. But we're bringing that to the table now. So to have those informal work sessions where we can sit down and talk openly with each other to say, this is where we are now. This is a beautiful point in time with all of us at this table. If you look around the table at the experience, whether it be in the community or as we at the, in our backgrounds that we have, I think this is a great time for us to make sure that, one, we're aligning our conversations, we're talking about the advocacy that we want to do together, and then let's move forward and be more proactive. And I think we have that opportunity now. This was the first start in being proactive. having those, hopefully in the very near future, after our chairs and vice chairs meet, of what's next, what's next. And I look forward to the small groups where we put everybody in this room into small groups and start having conversations of what's next on our agenda. Again, going back to everything from making sure that we're building instructional leaders, making sure that we're building teachers that are ready for the science of reading, that are already there and expanding that, making sure that we have teachers that are ready for vibrant learning and being able to teach in that method and make sure that it aligns. So the conversations that are going on here today just excite me about the conversations that we're going to have in the future. Because there's so much power when we put the groups together, where it's CPE, EPSB, and also KBE, and KDE, for that matter, as we move forward. So I think that we're at a good point, and I could listen to this conversation all day. But with that being said, that makes us excited for that next step. And again, getting our voices unified, one direction, moving forward, I think is so important. So I really appreciate the conversation. Start getting out those notepads now and be ready for the next meeting. So thank you so much for that.
All right, at this time, I need a motion for EPSB to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn. The motion before EPSB is to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. EPSB is now adjourned.
Thank you. I'd like a motion from KBE.
So moved.
Regarding agenda. Is there
So
a
moved.
second? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of KBE adjourning now, please, members, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Dinner is ready.